Hello and welcome to Multifamily Elevated. My name's Suzanne Hopson, and I am super excited to talk to you about vision, people, and execution, and how you can utilize this information to elevate you and your team and your experience in multifamily. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network, giving you the latest and greatest news and content across our multifamily sector. So let's jump in. Enjoy this episode of Multifamily Elevated and enjoy the climb. Welcome back to Multifamily Elevated. We're going to jump right in just a few moments with our next guest, Jacklyn Arnest. I'm so excited to have her on this episode where we are going to deep dive into vision and all of the parts and pieces that go along with having a great one and having it really entrenched in your business. So just a little bit about Jacklyn. Jacklyn Arnest is the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Article Student Living. And she's also responsible for building and protecting the Article Student Living brand and leading the company's communication to key stakeholders. Her full service team of communications, digital and design experts employ dynamic real-time methodologies and advanced technologies in pursuit of customer acquisition, resident retention, and brand loyalty. She oversees the corporate communication function and all aspects of marketing at Article Student Living, including brand creation, advertising, and lead-to-lease conversion. Jacklyn has more than 20 years of experience that she's going to share with us today, helping organizations communicate, navigate, and lead in times of change. It has enabled programs to strengthen brands, mitigate risk, and engage employees at global, national, and local levels. Her vast experience includes leading strategic marketing functions to drive results. So please help me in welcoming Jacklyn Arnest to the show. Well, hello, Jacklyn. I am so excited to have you on. I'm just really anxious to jump right in. Are you ready?
I absolutely am. Thank you for having me.
Yes. This is a long time in coming, by the way.
Over a decade. I heard your name first, and then I always said this is somebody I need to connect with, and I'm so excited that we finally connected a couple years ago. But now, here learning more about Here to Elevate, it's very impressive what you're doing. So I appreciate being able to be a part of it, even in micro sense.
Well, there's a reason why you are JA with an exclamation point in my phone.
I love it.
It was meant to be. Yeah, well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. That's very sweet of you. I am really also excited about this topic, and I am glad that we had this meeting of the minds on this topic. You come to this conversation with a ton of experience in this area. And I want to dig in because I think that companies are struggling right now with clear vision, if you will, and then how to really implement that and get that ingrained into the culture of your companies. And so I think, especially with all of your experience and how this pertains to multifamily specifically, it's going to be a great show. So yeah, why don't we just jump right in? I'm going to ask a question and then we'll let it fly from there. Where do you begin? How do you do this? When you come into a company and they've asked you to do this, right? We need a vision. We need to get everybody rallied around it. Where do you start?
I think that's the best case is when they ask for it, right? And that doesn't always happen. So when we're looking at this process, it's really make sure to get the understanding that this isn't a marketing campaign or an annualized rally cry, that this is really a fabric of the organization. And it's not just your values and your mission, but it is truly the evaluation, whether it's current or new, to be a mission, vision, values, and purpose work. So it's all in a bow, and you move it forward to where it really is the culture of your organization and your representation of your brand, both internally and externally. So when I start, it's usually about where they're at in their journey. If they're an established organization, if they're going through leadership transitions, or if they're a startup. And a lot of times with startups, as you know, you don't have the luxury of time. So it usually is done within your executive team in a 1 to 2 day workshop, and the commitment to further develop throughout the organization as your organization develops, and then you pulse check at that first year mark. When it comes to established organizations, it's really first getting the teaching moment and vision moment from the executive team. It really starts there. Same approach can be taken with that 1 to 2 day workshop, because you always have to sleep on it. When you do something really great and really emotionally charged or passionate, and you hope that is the case when it is your leadership team, that you rest on it, you come back to the table. But the best ways that I've seen it truly adopted is when you fragment the discovery portions and you include all levels of the organization, whether it be in focus groups, whether it be in critical sessions. But really, when you're including all levels, you increase the adoption faster. And then in addition to that, they're part of something bigger. And how often do our front lines or our site teams get to build the strategy of an organization or have that influence? So you're building them up for the future, because they will be the leaders of your organization in 5, 10, 15 years.
Well, I just got goosebumps. And I think for 2 reasons. One, it's incredibly inspiring what you're talking about. I remember being that young person, mid-level, and being brought in and asked my opinion and my input. And it made an entire difference about my loyalty to the company, just how I wanted to dig in and do more and, exemplify or be an ambassador once we were finished with that project. And so I totally get what you're saying. And quite frankly, if they don't buy into it, it will not work. You know this. We're going to get into it because you're the expert. But I love that part that you just mentioned about the focus groups and bringing, the other team members in. What happens with the CEO and their role in this? And what have you seen, good and bad? We don't need to name names, I know, so we're good. You can be truthful and honest.
Anyway, we don't talk about people, however.
Yeah.
It all starts with your leadership and everything that we do. And when you're doing this work, it's getting that baseline to say, this is how we lead. This is how we make decisions. But the biggest challenge in this work is holding leaders accountable to make sure they're following, communicating, and exemplifying the values almost to the extremity. So that way, as it trickles down and doesn't get caught up in the bottlenecks, can make it all the way through. People are really pumped about your organization, and from a hiring process, they know exactly what they're there to do and what they're getting into. And then it just gives clarity to all your processes as well, that there's never that gray area of should I or shouldn't I.
It's interesting when I think about what you were just saying about that, the hiring and the kind of the filtering that I've seen companies do. They literally use their vision, their core values to hire and fire. Like if you're not in alignment with that, it's really important. Like, you won't get the right people in the right seats if you don't have that first alignment with your core values and the mission and vision of the company. And so being able to articulate that well in the interview process, I would think would be really important. Would you say that that's true?
Absolutely. It always comes down to it as I'm leading and making those difficult decisions, whether to hire, whether to retain or terminate someone. It boils down to, is it character or is it training? Are people empowered and have that freedom of failure? And can we coach them up from where they are today rather than develop them out, or push them out? But if it is character and it's misalignment within the organization for whatever that may be, they may be a really great individual, but they're not going to fit in the long term, and they're going to do more damage while they're there than value, even in their current role.
I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I want to think about it out loud as I'm thinking about what you're saying, because it's taking me into like a different direction a little bit, and I love it. And I think it's really important, especially at the beginning of when you're really formulating, the vision itself. So is there a process to it? Like, I'm a big process gal. There are a lot of people out there who are process people. Is there a process to it, or is it just, I don't know, luck that you come up with a good vision and move on?
I always say it is best if it looks like luck, right? Because then nobody knows all the effort and work that goes into it. You look like a genius because you did it so well and you're lucky. But there's always a process. And in my world, there is always a process. There is always a metric phase. But as it pertains to that process, I think it's really who is going to lead this. If you don't have a marketing department, is it your CEO or your president? A lot of times it's the HR team, which they are the first touch in, the first touch out, right? So I always make sure if it is led within marketing and communications, which we generally have the brand control and build the brand and responsibility for that. If it's that I really make sure the president and the HR team, we are fully aligned. We understand that this is a partnership and not a sole responsibility of one individual. And so while we're having those think tanks, maybe with executive leaders and then trickling through to the focus group once those baselines are created, that we are having those pulse points to say, where do we really want to land? So we at least have a field goal in the line of vision rather than just a big, huge empty field. And that way we can get to where we want to go based on our experience in the direction of the company that not everybody has the privilege into yet, but that we're building the steps that everybody wants to see happen as you're doing this work too.
Oh, I love that. You said at the beginning about it being wrapped in a bow, like all the pieces and parts. Because I do think of it segmented, and the way that you're talking about it, it's really a flow and there is an order to it. Once you have that vision nailed, then what comes next?
I do it backwards. I generally start with your purpose because that's why we're doing what we're doing. Then I'll go values, because that's how we're making decisions and that's who we're leading to be, right? And then I'll go mission. Because even though what we do, as we're building our purpose and as we're writing our values, that may determine a different direction into what we do. It may say, hey, we have a lot to offer in this other sector, or maybe we should do third party, or even say maybe we unload third party and focus solely on our joint ventures. And that way you end with your vision because you know and understand where you are today, who you're doing it with, and then you start to write together where you want to go. So it's part of the strategic planning process. When you're really looking at that 3-year strategic plan, if you don't have one already in place, absolutely, it should start with your annualized strategic planning, but really at that 3-year mark in the evaluation to make sure that you're setting the right goals to build your business.
I love it. And you're absolutely right. I've met, smaller businesses that are starting out that don't have a clear vision yet. Start with just what's important to them. Like really their purpose, but also their values, personal values, and also professional values, which are pretty much in alignment most of the time for successful business owners anyway that I've seen. And that is the basis. You're absolutely right. It's the foundation of where everything begins. And I have seen it, to your point, where it's altered the direction, literally. I've seen that midstream too, like even 5-7 years into a company where they're still looking at it every year, still doing a pulse check on whether or not they're in alignment with where they're going. And all of a sudden, they don't let you blink. And I can take an example of this. When looking back at 2024 and 2023, even the pandemic, people had to shift what they were doing. Did you see that impact the overall, not only strategic plan, but, the vision or the strategy, I guess, or where people were going and how that affected this whole thing that we're talking about?
The pandemic,
and then just what has happened afterwards. I think there's been a lot of, difficulty transacting. There's been, a lot of, the supply demand issues that we've been having. There's just been a lot of pressure, especially on small business owners, where they haven't been able to freely transact maybe as much as they had in the past. And so they've had to shift the way that they do business, maybe not their values, right? But maybe their purpose.
Yes. Right. What do you know? Thinking with the pandemic is it forced agility. It forced us to think of every possible outcome, including those with reductions in staff, with reductions in profitability, with reductions in acquisitions or even dispositions. So it made you really evaluate where you're at in the moment and what you could do more with less. I worked with an incredible team during the pandemic where talk about reinforcing your values. Leaders were on the call. We had calls in the morning and in the afternoon because our goal through that reaffirmed our values, which was we do whatever it takes to put the people first and not lose our people. At that time, right, we're overcoming lack of childcare. We're overcoming municipality as well as when you're a U.S. company, other geographies and laws. And it was such a wild ride, but it certainly made you look at yourself in the mirror to say, what can we do? What do we want to do? And then what's truly possible. So you're still thinking aspirationally, but you're looking tangibly too. And with that, if we had to take those actions, you know, the best time that we see companies really hold true to their values, and I hate to use the word best time because it's never the best time, but it is times of crisis.
Yeah.
And crisis times really show if you're absolutely standing, living, and deciding by your values. And while we never want a crisis, you look at LA right now and the wildfires that are occurring over there, and the companies on day 3 that said, we are committing X amount of dollars to it. We are closing our doors to make sure our team members are safe and that our customers are safe, you know, and then it's always with those response plans that you truly see the values intact during those times. And I think the pandemic gave us that requirement, you know, about forced agility to make sure we were prepared in any scenario and knew what we wanted.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's a great way of looking at what happened. In hindsight, it looks to be such a great learning experience, and it was so difficult at the time. But yes, that is where you see the heroes and their convictions and their values really show and surface. And so, yeah, very, very good stuff. So I know this is a little bit off, but not really, because this plays into it as well. As you said, it's all tied up in a bow. But what about these things that we talk about all the time, these measurements, these KPIs? How does that play in all of this?
It's so jazzed when we talk numbers, Suzanne.
Me too.
I love the Churchill quote, you can't manage what you don't measure. And of course, he said it much more eloquent than that. But everything can be emotional. It's very easy to make emotional decisions or have a feeling or a perception. But when it is backed by the data points, you're really seeing where you're spending your time, if it's truly having impact or not. When you're talking about values work and vision work, you're really seeing if that's adopted and withheld throughout the organization or if it is surface level. So from a KPI standpoint, I think it's important to also note not to get too weighted in. I am somebody that loves to read the story. So I will look at every disconnect in a story and try to fill the narrative. But I don't always release that narrative to everybody, right? It's a story, so I'm continually making improvements and advancements. When it comes to this, though, in your KPIs, you're really looking at your absorption rate, what people can absorb outside of their day-to-day to move the company forward. In the adoption rate, those that can absorb it but can act on it. And those are the two pieces that I really look at during these times. And then what I consider a little bit of the margin of error, which is those feelings. You know, if you're hearing people talk about it, if you're seeing people emulate it, that's that percentage. But really, those are 3 core metrics that I look at to validate success of a initiative.
Wow. So what's the number? Like, I laugh when I say it out loud, but there are people who in their organizations have given people one. It's really hard to imagine that, and they've done it successfully. I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to dig in and find out how. Usually it's 2 to 3 metrics, per role or set of accountabilities. How do you put a metric on values and, core values and vision? And how do you do that? Like what's a specific example if you can think of one?
I think most of culture initiatives and foundational initiatives that are outside financial initiatives, generally, if you're really hitting that 80% adoption mark, because you're never going to have full adoption to your culture. There are certain roles that don't necessarily require it, that are mandated, where you have to have those placeholders. There's also just people that may not be coming with you on the journey, or may take a little more time to fully adopt a change in process or a change of culture. So I really look at that 80% metric, knowing that, and while it doesn't always equal 100%, but this is the margin for error generally is that 20%. How many feelings have we had? How many self-initiated projects within outside of the executive leadership team have been started because of these values? How are we recognizing people, but really looking to see where it shows up outside of the marketing and executive leadership team initiatives?
It's brilliant, really, Jacklyn. I love this, what you're speaking of, because that measurement outside of the leadership team is really not only a connecting point, it's also where you can find the disconnect. And I know we talked a lot about this amongst ourselves and online last year in at NAA, but just this disconnect with leadership and with our front lines, and culturally speaking, that being at the forefront, like leadership's not, walking the talk, and almost holding the values, not as a measurement stick, but as a measurement stick of whether or not, the company is truly living up to what they say that they are. And so I hear that from frontline people. And yes, often. And so being able to measure that disconnect, this is a random question.
Yeah.
But what do you think about post surveys that are anonymous to teams to get part of that information on how people are feeling or where they're at with culture and measuring that? Do you believe in those surveys, or what do you think about those?
I love that you said this is a little offshoot question, but it was exactly what I was going to ask you in the moment. It's those ways to ask for feedback. And if we're not asking for feedback, we're not wanting to improve based on what's needed. And you get a lot of great feedback, both reinforcing what you're doing, but giving suggestions to improve and adapt. I personally, every single all hands meeting we have and every single small group touch point, send out a survey and ask for feedback. But even better, as you're talking to an adoption, what I was going to ask you is, we do our employee engagement survey, don't always quantify those pulse surveys in the same way. So what are some ways that you have seen the most adoption, or metrics that you look at specific to when you're looking at employee engagement surveys or those pulse surveys?
Yeah, unfortunately, they have a lot of great companies out there that have centered, their focus and their business around this very thing, some of them in our space. And they do serve a very good purpose, I think, for nailing where the weakness is in a company. But I would say that, to your point, and I've measured it this way in the past, and I've got a client that does this as well. They count the number of shout outs that occur in meetings and by quarter. And it's very interesting to see the number of shout outs and the correlation between whether or not we got a goal accomplished for that quarter. Because there's a correlation. The shout outs are lower when we're not doing well, we're not performing. And I think that's a great indicator of, well, now we need to go with, like, what do we need to do to pump up morale, even while we're struggling and trying to, get stuff done. We'll say the other word, because that's what I say, like, a lot. Get stuff done. But that would be another thing. I think that you can tell, not by just a feeling, but by the communication level and the participation level of your team on whether or not they're buying in and they're feeling connected to the company.
Oh, completely agree. I absolutely love tracking those moments, because when people are willing to take the stage for someone else to celebrate them. But it is important that when we're not hitting those goals, understanding the correlations, that we're not hitting those goals, that we're still recognizing the lift that went into them. Because a lot of times we can be detoured from our goals, whether it's company objective, whether it is financial related, or, there are just hurdles we're always overcoming. So still recognizing the lift that goes into that. I love that. Bravo.
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't invent it, but I do think it's something to share, because I see a lot of that. I see a lot of data sometimes. And I'm a data like you, Jacklyn. I'm like a 10 on my data and like kind of low on the intuition. So I really have to have it to be able to make good decisions about things. But I also think that, some of that data is different than just the hard numbers. And it requires more of that conversation, like you said, like getting really into the conversation and finding where those gaps are. Yeah, I love it. So one of the things that you had mentioned, and I'd like you to, to maybe go into this a little bit, this has to do with rapid growth and, the ability to, have operational stability and maintaining your culture at the same time. Like, how do you do that when you're scaling? And you're bringing all these new people into the organization, and you're like, how do you do that? Because I've seen that detour, an effort of a company.
It's certainly not easy. And it does. As you mentioned, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of commitment. It does take detailed attention to it. So whether we're writing goals for our team members that tie into their income streams to say, hey, this is a portion, we see so much value in our values that a portion of your bonus is going to be allocated to that or this initiative. And what it is too, I'm losing my train of thought a moment. I love this stuff.
Well, rapidly scaling is really, that's the hard part, I think, when you've got just the speed to which you're bringing in newness into the organization. Like, how do you maintain the culture in that when people with their own values and their own belief systems and everything else are coming in and kind of messing with, maybe in a good way, but they're messing with it? Like, how do you keep everybody, going in the same direction?
And you want to encourage it too, right? Like, the value of bringing people outside of the organization in is for that fresh perspective and that fresh take. But as far as when you're in those rapid growth time, is why it's so important that it is a foundation, or you're making it a foundation, but you're building it through your processes, that you're building it through your onboarding material, that it's part of site weekly meetings, your department meetings, that it's constantly being part of this discussion, that you're reinforcing with visual, that all those pieces that you would put into a marketing campaign for adoption is also part of that. But rapidly, it also has to be part of those checkpoints of those 30, 60, 90 days, to where it's part of the conversation above and beyond your role. How's it going? Or do you feel like you're getting it? Do you need anything more? Here are your, performance metrics, and really saying, hey, what value do you align most with? Where do you see that we can improve emulating a certain value? Or how do you feel our company's representative? And it's asking those uncomfortable questions to make sure that you're on the right path, and then quantifying all those new hires or all those recent promotions, and saying, here's the feedback from this, and then it is quantifiable metrics to make decisions off of, because it's a group metric.
I love this so much. You just sparked another memory, a recent one. I'm in Notre Dame land. I'm saying this now publicly, which I might get sued more, because I belong to a couple of different teams and been in alliance with them over the years. Based on where I live, I'm 5 minutes from Notre Dame. I cannot fly any other flag. Something horrible might happen to me. But anyway, I'm kidding. But their new coach, and he's pretty famous right now, has made a huge difference. And he came in and he basically was shot. Like, he replaced one of the best and well-known coaches of all of our time. And he came in with an uphill battle, all new players, freshmen, a lot of freshman players. And he has just turned that team around And he's really gained the respect, not only from our local town, but also nationally. He's got NFL people looking at, picking him, and one very close and near and dear city to us is looking at picking him up. But what I noticed about last weekend's game, and a couple of the games actually, where we weren't doing real great on defense and our quarterback was getting killed, the team, you could tell, was just really down and not feeling it. And it was critical that they get straight in their minds quickly to be able to combat this. And it was almost like you could see the culture of that team from through the TV, which was super exciting. And how, he took a timeout. They went to halftime. They came back a totally different team. And when the team members came up and were telling, what was explained in that, it was all about the team. It was all about the fact that they needed to protect their quarterback, and that, it was just an amazing turn of events, but it was the culture. It was totally the culture that he's created. And, they used to be a team, and I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but what I noticed about the team was they're really aggressive. Like, maybe not doing the right thing sometimes. This is in times past. They are just a group now of highly regarded, full of integrity players that can win and win the right way. And it's really because I think their leader has really brought them into that organization, right? And filtered them appropriately, or gotten them back on the right track because of the values that he holds dear. So I just went on for a really long time about that, but it's another example of how this happens outside of just business. You could have this in your life, right? Like your family has a culture to it. That's a whole other hour, Jacklyn. I know
an entire podcast just you and I imagine. But you're talking football, and I'm a great girl, and you see a turnaround from a coach that's willing to inspire and empower leaders and hold true. Like, there's no question what the Detroit Lions stand for, and even their one pride. And maybe we're Super Bowl bound. I don't want to jinx it. We'll be there if we are. But I mean, the energy that has come up from that city, and I'm proudly been a part of it while I live in Florida now. I still go back and forth and did a little work in that city for a while. It makes a world of a difference for your internal organization in those that you implement and beyond. So as people are considering themselves industry leaders, or we are the largest, or we are the best, your best isn't just your internal impact or your results for your client. It's what you're doing to make our industry better and how you're doing it. And sports, even though I can quote anybody from anything other than my Lions, but I always love seeing those high time moments, those championship games, regardless of sport, because you're seeing the dedication people have to the individual or the team, but you're seeing all the people behind it. And we went to, not to go too off on a tangent, you can cut all this out, but
let's do it. We got time.
My daughter to the Olympics this year. One, because we love Paris, but I love sporting events that much because of the energy that comes out of it. It's not that I know what's going on all the time, or that I know anybody that's happening, or that's playing, but it is such an environment to recharge yourself, refocus, and say, it takes a lot of hard work to win, and it takes a lot of commitment. And there are things that you have to put aside that maybe not flow with your intentions, but your values should always be there and anchoring what you're doing in the organization you're doing it with and the industry that you're impacting. And I encourage everybody, I think in 4 years, maybe 8 years, they'll be back on the West Coast of the U.S. It's certainly worth seeing, even if you don't attend any games.
Wow. I love all of what you just said. And that was perfectly said. And yes, go Lions. Again, they were my team as well, being from Michigan, and just listening to my relatives, my dad, my grandpa fighting back and forth. Whenever the Lions and the Packers would be playing, we would get into that big thing. And it was always such a bummer because the Lions were always losing. And to see this comeback as part of the revitalization that I call it of Detroit in general, it's just been such an inspiration. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because that's been a huge inspiration.
Yeah, but very comparable to Notre Dame. And even like when we're talking about, okay, how can organizations get better, or where do they start? It's maybe they have paper bag fans right now, people that aren't necessarily proud to go out and say, hey, I work for this company and here's what we're doing. And going back to the raving fans book, right? And when I first started my career, that was all the things of how do you make your people raving fans? And a lot of it is just the pride that comes into having a clearly communicated, transparent vision and values, so people know their part to the end game.
It's amazing. And it also leads me to another question. And this is really about you, Jacklyn, and maybe you in your early years, and take a moment to think about this if you need to. But what would you say to an up and coming industry professional that is making a career out of this and really wants to move ahead? What kind of advice would you give to them based on your vast experience? Oh, what would you say to them?
Well, it really is tailored for the individual. And while I won't give you a blanket statement, for anybody listening to the podcast today, I will welcome conversations outside of the industry, in the industry, especially if you are breaking into it or early on in your career, because I was privileged to have so many people invest in me at such a young age. I started when I was 17 in this industry. And so imagine being bullheaded and always thinking I knew more than anybody else, which I clearly did not. Those people continued to invest in me and give me those opportunities. And so I welcome anybody that wants to connect, and we'll make time. But one thing that I consistently say, because it's relevant in any role, in any business, is know your numbers. You have to know the value that you're bringing and your worth. And yes, you can break that down by your KPIs. If you're in sales, it's, your closing ratios, or if you're in operations, it's where you're at to budget. But there's so much more than that. You should never question why you're within an organization. So I always know my market value and what I'd move for. And it really anchors me to be fully satisfied in my role, be very present in my role. And just like we have strategic plans in business, I have one for myself. You mentioned our family. My family operates as a business, and it's two people. It's myself and my daughter. We know what we want to do each quarter, and we know what we want to achieve. And, we all have a short time on this planet. So, and certainly, hopefully in the working world. So we want to make sure that where we're at adds value, aligns with us, and we're leaving a legacy.
Totally. It reminds me of your recent posts on the ICE Hotel. I won't give all of them, but yeah, well, you need to head and take a look at just what an adventure Jacklyn is.
Very travel. That's for certain. Well, when you grow up in this industry, especially, I did grow up in the new development space. I think my first 2 years were in tax credit. And then I think my first 6 months, I started with new development. So you're seeing the impact and the changing of cityscapes and landscapes, but you're seeing how you're shifting people to have expectations to live and live differently and pushing those boundaries. And I'm trying to think of the name of the company. Somebody in our space has a value of, I think it's maybe, I don't want to misspeak, so I'm not going to say the name, but it's people over apartments kind of vibe. And it's your people first and living that centrically, but then it's also the value of living inspired. And I think it's equity that has not just inspired, they have another word where it's like, it's not just about the apartment. It's about how are you bettering life and how are you bettering humanity? And each day taking that approach to always be better.
You're a tremendous human. I just want to put that out there. And I think it's very true. And you have consistently done that throughout your career. You've given back and you have made a difference. It's very, very true. And you're right. I think, especially for people that are up and coming, because I have a passion right now for emerging leaders and really helping them, through what they're going through, because that is probably the most difficult. Mid-level management is the most difficult place to be. Yeah, and so really just thinking about how to help them avoid some of the potholes is sort of a mission. And so I think, what you said is really an awesome give, which is to know your numbers and also know your worth.
Yes.
Yeah. I do feel like there's more confidence in our people coming in.
Too, and I love it.
Me too. They're like, hey, I'm this, and I can do this. I love that freshness. And they're also able to contribute a lot faster than people who may not feel that way about their own performance. They're just, the confidence is great. But yeah, I really appreciate that give to the group, as I think that's really important. Well, I would also like, before we have to, go, so I don't want to, I know who's at time already. It's unbelievable. How can people get a hold of you if they would like to have that one-on-one and be able to talk to you about some of these things? How can they reach you?
So LinkedIn is the best platform for me. 2025, I've committed to be much more active, much more available via that platform. So message me, engage with me, connect with me. I absolutely love it. And I'm really looking forward to the future. And I agree with you. The incoming class per se, yes, they have access to so much more knowledge above and beyond their company's training programs that they join. And our networks and the support that we have is so critical to our success and who we surround ourselves with. So I always appreciate anybody that wants to learn from me, as I will learn from them.
Well, you've had an exceptional journey, and I know that we need to have you back again, because we just went off and if there were things that I'm sure would be of interest to our audience. So let's plan on that for sure. But thank you so much, Jacklyn, for spending this time with us and sharing all of your wisdom. We really appreciate it.
I'm grateful for you and so excited about the future of Here to Elevate, and can't wait to see it. I would love to be back. And even if it's not recording, I love any minute with you. So thank you.
Me too. All right. Thanks again, Jacklyn.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to Multifamily Elevated, where we hope that you are inspired and ready to go, elevated to take on your next challenge in multifamily. So if you liked this episode, please subscribe, like, comment, and of course, share with your network. And don't forget that this was brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network, that is also sharing the latest and greatest in trends, ideas, and content across our multifamily space. Until next time, keep elevating, and we'll talk soon.